He has shown you, O mortal, what is good, and what does the Lord require of you, to act justly, and to love mercy, and to walk humbly with your God. And now, here's Reverend Sue.
I got Satan on my trail, but I'm singing all is well. He's attacking every day, but I'm watching while I pray. No matter the attack, I won't turn back.
Good evening, and thank you for joining us today. Our guest is Mr. Aaron Gamble, and he's a former police officer, and I'm excited to have him here. There's some things that's been on my mind for a while as I look at news and I read articles, and it just bothered me. I made me curious and anxious, not anxious, but ambitious enough to get more information in reference to police tasing. There's been several cases that I've followed, and my heart is aching right now for what I see. So it's nothing like bringing in, as we usually do, an outstanding guest, perhaps can guide me in the right direction. So thank you, Mr. Aaron, for taking the time to be with us today. There are quite a few cases that I have noticed that consist of police tasing. And I guess my first question is, when we talk about police tasing, what I'm looking at now, also mental health is right there with it. Do we have any type of training that the police staff are required to take in order to perhaps identify a person who is suffering from mental health? Can you just speak on that just for a few minutes?
Sure. I'm from Arlington. My former employer is Arlington Sheriff's Office.
That's very important. That's
yeah, no problem. Yeah. So it's Arlington Sheriff's Office. But sure, no problem at all. When in respects to tasing, before an officer can use a taser, he must be first certified in that taser that he is utilizing or he is issued. And it's yellow in color. It may be orange in color. Some of the agencies may be in orange, but most of the colors is yellow. It's to identify that it is a non-lethal weapon. In respects to training, yes, with the officer, the department, whichever department that officer is assigned to or works for, that officer undergoes extensive training with it. And the officer also gets tased with it. So that he understands what it's like to be tased. He understands what it's like to get the prongs taken out of you and things like that. So yes, the officers do go over extensive training with that taser. Yes, ma'am.
When you mentioned it's usually a color, like a color yellow or sometimes orange, is that's knowledge for the police officers and not necessarily for the person who's being arrested or who's being tased, right? Because
for the officer.
Right, for the officers.
It's for the officer to identify. If you think of your tool belt, if you ever see a person with a maintenance belt, they have all their tools. The same thing as an officer. When you see an officer, he has all his tools. So you can quickly identify, ideally, I don't give out too much personal information on it, but ideally we put it on the opposite side of our weapon. Some people, you may see it up here. It just depends on where that officer decides he wants to carry it. But hindsight, it's a color to identify that it's a non-lethal weapon, to differentiate from a lethal weapon, which is black in color.
I'm going back to Mr. Black. I believe he's from the state of Maryland, where he was suffering from bipolar. But at the time, it was not known, as the officer said, it was a mental health issue here. And they tased him, but yet they held him down, and he died right there. almost in front of his residence. There is another situation, and I'm speaking of that because it's very been publicized for a while now. Where for this last month, this young lady has a mental crisis, and her mom called 911, and the police came and they put handcuffs on her. And when they did, they put her in the car. They did not close the door. She fell out of the car and handcuffed, no brace, no balance or anything, and she died. There are other cases that I studied and reading about where there is a mental crisis and the police officer come, but they don't treat it as a mental crisis. So going back to, we talk about training. What is the police, what is the officers are doing now in reference to, the departments are doing in reference to mental health when they arrest a person, meaning that, is there any type of training that they can provide for the officers? And perhaps we would have eliminated the person's death, me talking. But what are the officers being trained on now? Because mental health is increasing tremendously, and it's all around us. So I'm sure that is happening when police officers begin to arrest people.
Sure. In regards to, every agency is different. So I'm not authorized to speak on what all agencies do. I don't know what all agencies, but based on my training and based on the officers that I mentor or I speak to on a daily basis, some agencies offer crisis intervention training. Arlington, Virginia is very good in getting their officers through the crisis intervention training. Also, I'm aware that Metro Transit, airport police, and some other the local agencies, and I believe Washington, D.C. is on board with that as well. This is called crisis intervention training. And we abbreviate it for CIT. So CIT is what we deal with, what those officers deal with, is they go through, I believe it's like a 2 or 3 week course where they have people who have mental health issues. They do a lot of role playing. We do a lot of studying on basically how to recognize those signs of a person in a crisis, when they are in a crisis, how to de-escalate, how to properly handle that call. And each and every call is different that officer may be faced upon, right? But what we can do to kind of curve that from a public standpoint is, one, if you have a family member that has a history of mental health, maybe go to that police station, your local police station, and let the station supervisor know, hey, I have an individual at my home that has a history of mental health. This is his name, maybe a picture, things like that, so that they know when they get it. Often when an officer is dispatched, he doesn't know. Sometimes he may not know that person may be having a mental health issues. And then sometimes he may, depending on if there's a history, like a call log, what we call a call log. So if I respond to 1738 33th Street, just hypothetically, the officer will run a history and see that he's had several calls there for maybe a mental health disturbance. So he's already on cue that when he arrives, hey, this is what I'm faced with. But if we offer that crisis intervention training to all departments, worldwide, then that may help with that situation. And what we're seeing with some of these cases where the public is feeling, kind of apprehensive of dialing 911 and fearing that their loved one may die. But having these officers, go through crisis intervention, that may not just solve the problem, because a lot of officers are going to be like, wait a minute. That's not the key. The key issue is these local states to come together and create more of a hotline. Instead of dialing 911, maybe dial a crisis line, maybe have a counselor who partners with the police department so that counselor can respond to the scene, as well as an officer, just to ensure safety and security. A lot of times you have officers who have no other resources available, and they're put upon to deal with a person who's having a mental health issue or mental health problem.
I was thinking about, as you talk about this, a lady I know, I know at least about three people now, children happen to be autistic. And one lady was telling me about a month ago that she really wanted to call because it was a crisis. Mm-hmm. And she was afraid to call because she felt like if I do call, they just might arrest him, and that's not going to be the answer. Mm-hmm. So I said, it hasn't happened before. She said, yes, but I was able to calm him down. But now, sometimes it gets to the point that because he's 6'3", 6'4", and she's about 5'2", and she didn't know what to do. So that was the reason why I kept thinking that we can provide as much information to our brothers and sisters who are experiencing these things as we speak. So I like that from the standpoint is not necessarily think about it, registering, number one, and then not necessarily calling 911, but maybe a hotline to answer those questions or do something about it. Because when a police officer comes, most time they're going to arrest the person. And
not always necessarily arrest, because in order for an officer to arrest, a crime has to be committed. You know,
right.
When you think of being arrest, now what in some cases we could take that person to be evaluated. You know what I mean? We can take them to the hospital. If that hospital has a mental health unit, and some of the hospitals, local hospitals, have a mental health unit where you could take that individual down to be evaluated, and the doctor determines whether that person is having a mental health crisis or that person needs to be committed. Then they go before a judge, and all the legal action takes place. But I don't want people to feel like if I dial 911 that my loved one who's having, maybe exhibiting some type of mental health, that the law enforcement officers are going to come and arrest them. They're not going to arrest them. A lot of times what they do is they'll place you for security to prevent yourself from harming yourself and others. We may place you in handcuffs, but you're not arrested. The reason why is that we handcuff you in the front, not from behind. When you're handcuffed from behind, you're obviously arrested, but we'll handcuff you in the front just to prevent you from, harming yourself and others.
Okay, that's good to know for parents and for their loved ones. Okay, when you talk about handcuffs, arrest or not arrest, or take them to the hospital, not take them to the hospital. In my mind, in the history, I'm thinking about this young black man, and now the police officers are there, and what would happen? I know you don't know everything, but what is the thing that most people are going to think? This is a young black man, police officer going to arrest him. We don't call it arrest, but be there. Is there's a racial situation going on with even with this topic that we're talking about? Do you see the difference when it comes to race?
I don't really like to comment on race because I just don't. I'm not an expert in that when it comes down to saying, hey, this is racial bias towards, African Americans who have mental health crisis versus other. I would leave that to the public's perception on what they see in versus videos and let them come up with their own conclusion as to what they do. And if they see it, then they need to, when we go to vote and things like that, that's why it's important to vote for the people and know who you're voting for so that we can effect change. And the only way we can effect change in our community, whether it's a sheriff, whether it's a police chief or something, is by voting, is by being active in our community and taking some type of level of responsibility to say, hey, this is not what we're going to tolerate. This is how we want our community to be. Our local representatives, in our community to represent what we want and how we picture our community to be. So if I have a loved one who has a mental health, have mental health issues, then I need to have those services readily available for my loved one. And the option is not always to have police involved. The option is not always just to have, to call 911. We need more help for our loved ones that are in these communities that have these mental health. They deserve to get mental health treatment and not necessarily have the police come up. Because sometimes when you look at mental health, that uniform can trigger, especially if you look at a person schizophrenic or anything like that. You showing up in a uniform can trigger that. And I've seen it many times before. So a lot of times when you have that, depending on the agency, if you have a good agency, you have good safety in mind, they won't dispatch a uniform officer to that location. They may dispatch a plainclothes with an aide next to them so that that person is not triggered. You know, because if I'm triggered behind it, then that just escalates everything else.
I agree, because I mean, anytime I get stopped by a police officer just driving, the heart rate goes up a little. That's just a natural thing that you're sitting there, like, why would they stop me? What's going on? Boom, boom, boom. And if you're having a crisis, that's an increase. I'm glad you mentioned that. Another thing, I'm so happy you said this, that people should never forget. You have to vote, and you have to do a local voting. A lot of people wait until the national voting, but the local vote is going to bring your chefs in. Local vote is going to bring other officials in that will have everything to do with your community. So, and voting is coming up in November. That's something that we over and over and over again in our show to emphasize the importance of voting. So, thank you for that. There is a situation where I'm thinking about churches or schools where I know that police officers are trying to become better when it comes to community, working with the community. But how about having some type of, or do they do some type of program relating to mental illness when it comes to our citizens, our students, our young people, and they would understand also as much as possible that if people come to your home and there's a crisis, I know they're having a crisis, but they also know that it's the best for them, not to the point that they're going to arrest them, and not to the point that they did something so bad. That's because they have the health crisis. So are you doing any type of training at schools, elementary or high school?
I'm not able to answer that because typically, because every agency is different. Now we got to look at it. We're talking about just several different agencies that are in our areas, like several different municipalities and all that. So every agency is different as to what they're doing, but that comes out of their outreach program. What we would like to see, or as a former officer, what I would like to see is that we get into the churches, and like you said, mention the churches, and just do more outreach and talk to the public about how we address how those officers will address mental health concerns. To have public forums, to have a number and put out there that there should be a number that you can call if you're having a crisis. This is the number you call, and this is our response, because it is concerning now, considering, like you brought up the point about the young lady who died in the presence of the officer, and that's every officer's worst nightmare, to have someone die in your presence. But it also comes back into, are you following policies and procedures? Did you follow all of your policies and procedures? Even when you talk about using tasers, there's policies and procedures that we have to utilize. And when we fail to utilize our policies and procedures that are put in place, sometimes, it ends in complete failure, and we let the public down. But yes, we do need more effective communication in the community from all sides, not just law enforcement, but from all sides, from the health community partnering with law enforcement, and then law enforcement and the health community speaking to the public about how we can better address mental health. There are some cases where, some people just have they have a death wish, and the officer doesn't know anything about it. He just comes on the scene, and the person just is suicidal. They want to die, and they want to die by the hands of the officer. Again, that officer has to make the ball is put in the officer to make a split-second decision. You want to try to de-escalate as much as you can, create distance, de-escalate. But then what happens when that individual pulls a weapon on you? You know what I mean? He's just coming at you with a knife, or any type of gun or anything like that. And he doesn't want to commit, he doesn't want to kill himself. He wants you to do it. So there's a lot of things and a lot of pressure put at the hands of that officer that he has to make sometimes a split-second decision, following his policies and procedures, following his training, and also identifying whether this is a serious threat or it's something that he can kind of de-escalate.
That's a very good point. I'm not an expert. I'm not a psychologist. I'm not a psychiatrist. That there could be a death wish, and people have no idea that is happening. Only the person. You know, I just asked that question a couple of days ago. I was speaking to someone, and the person was doing so many different things. I said, "Is it a death? Is it death?" They looked and see if it's really a death wish, and the person was in the hospital. And so I called some experts, and they gave me some question that the family really should, or the psychologist should really ask that person, because it could be a death wish. So that's important. There's so much going on out here, and for the officers to do as much as possible to not, like you said, have a nightmare in their hands now, because evidently the training was not there, or they did not apply the training, or they were doing the best they could, but it was the wrong way to handle it. And then now you have a serious problem like Mr. Black. You know, that's one of those serious problems that's going on. And the young lady is, you know, that was just really bad. The door was not closed. So anyway, that I'm going to talk a little bit about more of that because the case is still going on. I'm not a lawyer, so, but I'm glad you brought that up. There's another thing is that I just feel like children should be educated to that. It really educated our society, where we take it for granted that people know about these things, but sometimes you really talk to, we really don't know about what's happening and what we can do better as a family when we call, and having a registry there that boom, that person's name comes up somehow the way, you know that person has a mental health issue, and you know immediately that it is. And that's something that I don't know what's happening around here, but I'm going to do a follow-up myself to see if that's really what's happening, because you know when they stop you, they pull your name and driver's license, they know everything about you. So why not have a registry where they have the data there that they would know immediately, okay, this is what we have right now. This is what we have to deal with. And it turns a whole new world comes when you know what you're doing. The bipolar person, they didn't know it was bipolar. And just so many different things. So thank you on that. If you had to work with, I'm going to have this question now because I have here police officers. It's my understanding that you don't want to do a race thing here, but they have less African American or people of color actually joining the police force. I think this is throughout the country, not just here in the Washington, D.C. metropolitan area. Could you say a little bit about that? Or do you see what's happening, or people becoming just so afraid and so sensitive they'd rather not even deal with being a police officer?
I have seen and it's not just the race, I have seen a decrease in law enforcement. If you look at worldwide, in our country, like there's shortages of law enforcement in Virginia and in DC and Maryland. There's a huge shortage. And and some of that is when you look at the defunding of law enforcement, and, you know, and just me just speaking to officers, not feeling appreciated, just nothing like coming to work every day. And people are just basically saying, hey, defund the police. Hey, you're not welcome in my community. You know, et cetera, et cetera. Not every officer is a bad officer. You know, you do have, and it just like not every good employee is a good employee. You know, so you do have some bad apples in any employment that you go. But I think as in whole, it is taking a mental health toll, even on some officers, just what they're faced with on a daily basis. Think about an officer. An officer sees things that the public just doesn't want to see or just doesn't want to deal with. And sometimes, so I just, you know, I take my hat off to these officers who sign up to become it, because it's not easy. Everybody's not cut out. That's why they have an academy set up. That's why they have a strenuous background check and things like that they do. But, you know, I would like to see more, you know, women officers out there. You don't see a lot of women officers out there in some of the areas that you're looking at. You just don't see a lot of people wanting to be police officers anymore. And so we're short. And with crime that is steadily rising, carjackings are at an all-time high, robberies are at an all-time high. Crime is just at an all-time high. And with some officers, like some departments are just very, they're short-staffed where they have mandatory overtime. It's all in the news. So, I think as a public, if we can just say, hey, time out. We don't like bad officers. We're going to deal with that. But these good officers that you see in your office, that you see in your communities, if you can just say, hello, thank you for your service. We appreciate you. It just, it gives them that much better. And sometimes I think they need to hear that.
I'm glad you said all officers are definitely not bad, because you have to that they are rotten, and be able to take them away from that particular tree so we can move on. And another thing is that I was just thinking again about when a police officer approach, say a person, I'm just giving a scenario, because carjacking has been unbelievable. I know in this area and probably all over the country. I know in DC metropolitan areas increased tremendously. And so you got to touch a person, that person stole a car. Then you find out that person has a mental issue there, right? But a person stole the car. That would be a tough situation to deal with, because now you arrest the person, right? So it's all kind of decisions that have to be made at that moment. At that moment, if that person has a mental crisis, now you know that, you see that, you've been trained, you know what, and that person now has actually, there's something that needs to be arrested. You have to immediately make a decision as an officer. And pray that you're making the right decision. You want to talk a little bit about that?
So when it comes down to making, I haven't really seen too much or case study on people stealing cars and then having a mental or being in a mental crisis stealing a car. Usually in some cases, I mean, it's very rare. You just don't see, especially when we talk about carjacking or anything like that. In regards to decision, it always falls back on your training, and every department will tell you it falls back on your training. If we, with the defunding of law enforcement, we talked about defunding. I don't think everybody really understood how much that impacted our local law enforcement. When you defund a police agency, that takes away resources that you can have officers strategically placed in your hot zones. That takes away the training and development of these officers, because think about every training that we have. If we have taser training, and this new taser came out, the G33 something XL. Well, the department has to pay for these officers to go and get that training. If there's something that the public has mandated, or the doctor says, hey, we want you to go do CIT, well, somebody has to foot the bill. And we have to send a certain number of officers out, and also maintain a number of level officers to patrol the streets and do whatever else that they need them to do. So when you defund, now we say, all right, we're going to cut you down to this small budget. So it takes away from everything on the total board that, some of these officers may not be getting the necessary training that they need to get, or, to excel, because it's like college. You're constantly excelling in your career. There's obviously things to become a detective. You have to do a certain amount of years on the force. Then you have to take a schooling and things like that to be able to understand it. So you take all that into where we are now. Crime is on the rise. People don't feel safe. People don't feel safe in their own homes. We have a mental health because people have been, sheltered for so long and in their homes and things like that. What I would like to see, just pivot off of that, is if you see someone, let's catch it at the early stage. Don't pass it off. You see someone not acting right. They're sheltered in their house. They don't go outside, but they used to go outside. They don't talk right. They just say, the moon is black. I just don't, man, the world is, the walls are closing in. I just feel like the bricks on my shoulders Sometimes we ignore those things. And if you go back and you're a police officer, you go back and you're doing an investigation, what did the person say? How is the person feeling? We ignore a lot of those signs, those telltale signs. So let's catch these people in their early stages. We notice that he's just sitting in his room all day. Whether kids, we have kids who are having mental health crisis too. He sits in his room all day. We have a lot of active shooters who were under the age of 25. Mm-hmm. Let's address it. Let's talk about it. Who are under the age of 25? And you listen to what the parents say. Yeah, I knew something was wrong. He just sits in his room all day and just plays with a gun all day. Or he's not eating. He doesn't have any friends. He doesn't have any social life, but he's constantly looking at violent things. He's constantly making violent statements and things like that. It's time to get that person some intervention. Get that person, call a doctor, do everything you can. Get them before a doctor, get them some type of things. Don't wait until, oh my God, now your child or your loved one is out here committing a heinous act or something. And now it's no longer a mental health crisis. The law enforcement is coming to arrest you because you've done something so heinous that it is now a criminal act. So we need to recognize that your loved one is having a mental health or maybe experiencing some things that just aren't. You don't seem normal. Suggest that person take them to the doctor, take them to the ER and get that person, call the hospital. Hey, do you have some type of mental health evaluation that you do? Do you have anything offered? What is offered in my community? Let me call these numbers. Let me get you some help. You may not be having it, but we don't know. Let me get you some help right away. And it starts at the early stages. If we can catch it at the early stages, we prevent so much that is going on in the world right now.
And everything you said is it's so important to see that community working together. Mm-hmm. The family working with the school, the family, Tricia's working with the family and the police office, the police department working with the school and the churches and the family coming together to save that person, and saving that person will save many people that we are dealing with the crisis right today as we speak. I thank you, Mr. Aaron, for taking the time to be with us. It's just been, we need you. We need you in our community. We need your knowledge and your passion, for what you're doing. And I thank you for taking the time to be with you. And also, just one thing you would like to leave with us, the community, the department, the churches or the families, one thing you would like to leave with us, if you don't mind. You don't have to, but one thing that comes to your mind.
Sure. Just peace, love, and just coming together and partnering, not pointing fingers and things like that. I would like to see just more love in our community and just, see something, say something. You always see it on the news. See something, say something. But also our duty to act as a public. We have a duty to act and to get these politicians involved, to get to go to these law enforcement departments that are in your community and ask them, hey, let me set up a meeting. Like, can we set up a forum? How do y'all address this? How can we, community leaders partner with the church and partner with the law enforcement and partner with our town people and just come together and just show one another love. And if you see an officer out there, I just would respectfully ask, just, hey, I hope you have a good day, or be safe out there. Just some type of love, because it's just, you're just not seeing it now. And I think people are seeing so much trauma in the world that they're desensitized when they see an officer. You just like, turn your face up. And we often forget that in our time of need, we also have to dial 911. Criminals have to dial sometimes 911. So you just think about it. So we want to be supportive of our officers in our communities. We want to partner with them. We want to understand. If it's something that you don't understand about law enforcement, you can always go to that station and ask for a desk sergeant and talk to them about how they respond to certain things, especially if you have somebody in your household that may have a history of mental health. Go to that local department and talk to them and say, hey, what do y'all offer? What can we do? How can we to ensure that my loved one will be safe? And there's nothing wrong with that.
Police teasing in our community and mental health.
Community partnership. Yes.
Partnership.
Yes, ma'am.
And for our listeners, we thank you for taking the time to be with us today as well. And like Mr. Aaron said, that, you probably heard something that you need to check with. Pay attention. Pay attention to your loved one and the signs that person is showing you. And just don't say it's going to go away. Do something about it. Do something about it. And to our police departments throughout this country, training is significant because training can save your life, police officer, as well as an individual. To do the right thing, make the right decision at a particular time. You don't have long to make those decisions. Make the right decision. Example for what you're going to use, what equipment you need to use, and what you need to say. May God bless you, Ms. Aaron, and continue to do the fantastic, outstanding work that you're doing. A passionate person. Passionate person. May God continue to use you in a mighty way. We thank you.
Thank you.
There's no